Welcome, listeners, friends, collectors, here with Todd Tobias. We're going to talk about the AFL. That's the American Football League. Now it's American Football Conference. And in fact, they've even disturbed that by flipping some teams. But back in the 60s, the AFL was probably the more exciting brand of football. So Todd's going to we're gonna go back into that. First, thanks sponsors: Topps Panini Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, including Beckett Grading and Beckett Authentication. So I love the AFL, and apparently you did too, Todd. You're younger than I am, but how did you come to this love of the AFL, as well as some players in particular that you've kind of adopted?
Well, my interest in the AFL started when I was in graduate school. I was in a master's program for a history degree, and being in San Diego, and working in a sports museum, I was able to work out an internship with the San Diego Chargers, and they asked me to reorganize their team photo archive. And so I was going down and going through all of this old material, reading all of these great old newspaper articles, seeing these fantastic photos. And right about that time was when I needed to select a subject for my master's thesis. And so I was talking with my advisor about it, and she said, "Well, you're really in the midst of a great amount of Charger information. Would you be interested in writing something about the Chargers?" And so eventually that got narrowed down to writing about Sid Gilman, the Chargers head coach, and his overall effect on the AFL. And so that's what really kicked open this door for me, this area of interest in the AFL. It's
not just his influence on the AFL. He was an offensive genius. He impacted all of football, and really all of football all the way down to high school, or
Sure.
his more open offenses. That was what was cool about the AFL, is that it was more wide open. And again, Sid Gilman probably was close to the epicenter of that. So was that what you did your master's thesis on? Because
on Sid Gilman.
I think some people are going to want to get master's degrees. They can, of course, they might stumble through some of the coursework. But still, doing research on something you love, wow, that sounds like a lot of fun.
I was really fortunate because, Sid was still alive and living in San Diego at that time. And so I was able to get to know Sid and his wife Esther very well and visited with them often. That's where I started to meet many of the different Chargers who played for Sid: Keith Lincoln, Paul Lowe, Ron Mix, Lance Allworth, guys like that, John Hadel. And really the combination of a fascinating subject, access to firsthand sources being the people themselves, and then having that old, collecting gene in me, that the combination of those things really got me going into collecting the AFL. And it's been something I've absolutely loved ever since.
One of the things you've mentioned is that you had a strong connection to Johnny Robinson for one reason, but you also had a strong connection to Lance Allworth, which would be a San Diego connection, but he also played for the Cowboys and at the end of his career. But is it broader than that, or are those primary and Sid Gilman? But around here, I mean, I've got some friends that used to play in the AFL, and Lamar Hunt, he's passed away now, but he was a wonderful guy, and I had a few interactions with him. But kind of the godfather of the AFL for sure.
Right.
But I mean, so is it broader, or have you focused on those players?
My interest is in the league in total. So I have an interest in anything associated with the AFL. I collect autographed AFL card sets. So, for example, my 1963 Fleer set it's 88 player cards plus a checklist. The entire set is autographed. I'm the same thing with my 1964 Topps set. I'm missing one card for 65 Topps, and so on and so on. So yeah, definitely, I'm interested in the league in total. I have a handful of certain individuals that I don't know if you want to call it player collect or master collect or what have you, but guys that I try and get every card issued of them. Lance would be one, Johnny Robinson's another, Sid's another. And for those guys, I try and get autographed examples of every single thing that I can. And
Todd, you showed me some of your stuff, very impressive, and it's not just that it's hard to get the cards. It's hard to get them autographed. I did note that Johnny Robinson just doesn't have very many cards. I think in the Beckett online price guide, there's only like 40-something cards, 42 cards listed for him. On the other hand, you have them all, I think, and have them all autographed.
I do. The only ones that I'm missing are the Fairmount Dairy cards that were the ones cut off the milk cartons in the 60s that are exceptionally difficult to find.
You don't have them at all, or you don't have?
I don't have them at all. I don't have any of the cards. But I do have the 1960 7-11 Dallas Texans card signed. There's another one that's not even listed in Beckett. Both Lance and Johnny have one, and actually this card isn't listed anywhere. But it was a card that's roughly postcard sized that was produced by the Lee Clothing Company in the early 1960s, because Lee sent out a handful of college and professional athletes to do appearances at department stores and sign autographs. And they made these little postcards of each of these guys. And Johnny happens to be one of those guys that has a card, and so does Lance.
Yeah. Johnny Robinson was hopefully put to bed, thanks to your help, a little bit of perhaps anti-AFL bias.
Right.
It's kind of like the baseball players playing in Colorado, that there was thought to be a little bit of statistics inflation because the offenses. But on the other hand, you got Johnny Robinson that's leading the league in interceptions. Of course, they're slinging the ball around, but he's pretty amazing. So I think he didn't get in the Hall of Fame, and many of his other Chiefs, former Texans and Kansas City Chiefs guys got in, but he was highly respected.
Absolutely.
That's kind of what I got. So was Lance Allworth, who is the last of the kind of the regular sized guys. He's like a regular sized guy.
He is.
He is a superstar, and he was fast, and he was shifty, but he was not. I guess he was elusive enough that he never got taken out. But even now, he's not a. He's just like a regular sized guy. He doesn't look like.
He is very much so. I go to visit Lance, and he's a little bit shorter than I am, and I certainly weigh more than he does. And he's very much, you look at him and you don't say, oh, that guy played pro football for 10 years.
Yeah. Todd Robinson, you look at him, he looked more like the football players looked in the friends that played in those days. They were not he just looked like a football player, and the respect you can have for somebody that can switch from being kind of a all-pro or at least a really, really good running back or flanker, and then all of a sudden he gets flipped to the other side of the ball and is immediate all-pro. The guys in those days they were football players, and the position wasn't as big a deal. And it just seemed like the AFL, being the upstart league, kind of gave some of those guys a chance.
Well, absolutely. A lot of those guys, the NFL, certainly they had an arrogance because there was no competition for them. Right. They could do whatever they wanted. They could tell a ball player he was good enough, he wasn't good enough, what have you, because there was nowhere else for these guys to go unless they maybe wanted to go to Canada. But once the AFL came around, then there's options for these players, and they can go somewhere else and showcase their talents. One of the things I think that the AFL did was expose just how many people the NFL overlooked. I mean, looking at the end of a Paul Lowe's career or a Jack Kemp's career, guys that were at one point on NFL rosters, or a Don Maynard. Do you think there's really any teams, NFL teams from the 60s, that wouldn't have loved to have those players play for them?
Well, except the only problem is that there have been options every 5 or 10 years. Some group comes along to try to compete with the NFL. And AFL is really actually didn't even the first AFL. There were several other AFLs that tried to compete and were not able to. And there have been, every 5 or 10 years there's been something. And so there's hope for that, for those kind of the people that are into it. Donald Trump had a foray into competing with the NFL, but none of them were really successful except for the AFL. And again, just a shout out to my fellow Dallasite, whom I had great respect for, Lamar Hunt. I mean, the quality of the owners in the original AFL was a big deal.
Without question.
And the camaraderie they had, that they would, I call it, it's been called co-opetition. It's competing, but you're also cooperating where it's appropriate to really build something. And, it's probably a good model for how to compete against a very entrenched, very well-funded, essentially a monopoly. And like you said, proved out in the quality of the product and the later merger. We wouldn't have a Super Bowl. I mean, it went to much greater heights, much greater heights. How are you keeping the AFL dream alive? I mean, is that part of your goal? Because it's not out of sight, out of mind, because there's still memories of that, but it had its own distinction. And even now with the two different conferences, there's still some aspect of that, but I assume you think that's healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally feel that the NFL does not do a great job at recognizing their history, and I don't think they do a great job of recognizing the AFL in particular. One of the things that I do is try and keep that AFL memory alive as much as possible. I do that through my website, which is Tales from the American Football League. I write articles for that. One thing that I've been doing a lot more of since we've been in this self-quarantine situation is tweeting out pictures of some of my signed cards and sharing examples of that kind of stuff. And sadly, a great number of those AFL players have passed, and a number, the rest of them are getting up in age. But I'm also recognizing a younger generation. Maybe it's started with a lot of the kids of these AFL players. I'm in connection with a number of the children of former players, but there's still appreciation. And one great example is kind of the uproar that occurred this year when Tom Flores didn't go into the Hall of Fame. I think that Raider fans were really, really upset about that. And certainly you could say that was mainly for his days as a coach, but he's also very much recognized as a player, and he was a very accomplished player.
Right.
So, I don't think that the general knowledge of the AFL is great out there today, but in individual aspects, it can still be pretty strong.
Well, my good friend is Bill Kreischer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He's a great guy, and I haven't seen him in a while, but he's lived here, and I've been to a bunch of stuff. And he's actually the one that referred me to your website.
Oh, really? Oh, great.
Over the years. So,
okay.
But what he impressed, we're kind of out of time, so I just want to end with this note, is that, and he's just a great guy, but he basically was saying that in the early AFL days, those guys loved playing football. Mm-hmm. And they were quality guys, and they enjoyed playing football, and they just wanted a chance.
Right.
They weren't in it for the bucks as much as they were just in it because they loved the game. They wanted that chance, and there was a camaraderie of being in it together. Like I say, the kind of the co-opetition, which again probably in part came from Lamar Hunt and some of his other owners. But it's striking to me that that's the only success story that we've really had in football of anybody competing against the NFL. So,
following up on your cooperation or co-opetition theme, I'll give you this little bit. I've spent a lot of time with Lance Allworth and interviewed him a number of times. And one time I asked him what he was the proudest moment of his career. And think about this guy. This is a guy that led the league in touchdowns many times. He was the first AFL player inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He won a championship with the Chargers in 1963. He won a Super Bowl with the Cowboys. His proudest moment, or the biggest moment in his career, was Super Bowl III when the Jets beat the Colts, because it proved legitimacy for their entire league.
It legitimized. Well, Todd, you're legit too. So I appreciate you taking some time for me and my listeners. What a treat to go back in memory lane and look at the AFL. And again, I hope football can get back playing with real fans in stadiums around the country. It'd be, don't know that I'm going to call it an essential industry. Right. It's essential for us collectors. So thanks, listeners. Thanks, Todd. Be back again tomorrow with another episode for your listening pleasure.
Is